Good evening. We begin tonight with a First Alert 6 investigation. Our team has uncovered that two brand new Elkhorn elementary schools are not in compliance with Omaha city law and should not be open to students.
Reporter John Chapman says the Elkhorn School District disagrees. They say both schools are safe and secure for students and staff.
Kindergarten through 5th grade students were met with this sight on their first day at Iron Bluff Elementary School, an active construction site, complete with heavy equipment moving around and unfinished sidewalks. Pretty much the same picture at Stone Point Elementary. Lots of construction work going on outside. A yard full of parents were really upset when they got a look inside the schools.
There were men welding. There were rooms without electricity or air conditioning run to it. There were construction crews everywhere. We were really flabbergasted, cords hanging from the ceiling.
Elkhorn school parents checked into the inspection reports of the schools and noticed what they believe to be serious projects that need to be completed. The school's fire prevention system, plumbing, heating and cooling, and the inspection of a storm shelter.
And at first I was very angry and wanted to give the benefit of the doubt. And when we did that and approached the administration and we're told, no, we're okay, we can have people in here.
They're not in compliance, they should not be occupying the building, and they know that.
Anna Bespoasny is the building superintendent of the Permits and Inspections Division of the City of Omaha. She tells us Elkhorn Public Schools does not have a certificate of occupancy and the schools should not be open.
And so they are not complying with the law because they're occupying a building that should not be occupied without a certificate of occupancy.
Elkhorn Public Schools issued a joint information shared by the district and Prairie Construction. It reads in part, the issuance of an occupancy certificate requires full completion of the project, including such things as landscaping. It goes on to state, this process has been consistent over several years in the construction of many school buildings across the Elkhorn Public Schools. Are you satisfied with the response you've been getting from the district?
Absolutely not. Not even remotely close.
From what I understand from our inspectors, they need at least another month in order to complete the work that's been left unfinished so far. And so it's my opinion that they should probably adjust their school calendar, give the contractor the month to get that work completed so that they can safely occupy the building after they receive that certificate of occupancy.
City officials tell us even though the Elkhorn School District is not in compliance with the law, there's not much the city can do about it.
Normally, a person or a business that occupies a structure without that certificate of occupancy would be subject to penalty fees. However, the way that the municipal code is written, that the schools are exempt from paying permit fees.
I think it's something we need to address at the state level. I mean, there are so many rules that have been broken at the city and state level, putting these kids in this school in the condition it's in.
In Omaha, I'm John Chapman, First Alert 6.
Again, Elkhorn Public Schools says the buildings are safe. In their statement, they say inspectors and the fire marshal had a list of items that needed to be addressed in order to allow kids in the building. The district says they successfully completed that list before the school year started. We have their full statement on this story at firstalertsix.com.